It's important to me to talk about our vision for missions and mission relationships with you all while you're here for several reasons. One, I know that there are people all over the world who are doing mission work, who do it differently, they understand it differently, they talk about it differently. And since you all are here with us, and since your church has made a commitment to this ministry, it's important to me that you all are pretty clear about where we're coming from. So first, it's for your benefit. I want you all to know who we are. Second, it's for our benefit. As much as I would love to go back to your church with you and sit down and have coffee with every single member of your church, that would be a lot of coffee, but I could do it. I've been training for it. But as much as I would love to have this conversation with every single one of them, obviously I can't do that. I know, and you probably know, that a lot of people are really critical of short-term missions these days. Voluntourism is a word that gets thrown around that just makes my skin crawl. But a lot of those criticisms are warranted. And I think one of the things that we always haven't done as well as we could is we haven't always talked about this the right way. So we give people a wrong impression about what this is about, what mission trips are about, and what missional relationships are about. So I want to try and to me, this is sort of a teaching moment. I want to see if we can figure out better ways to talk about this so that people who aren't here have a better understanding of what it is that we're doing and why we're doing it. And so I started thinking about this years ago when I started first having these talks with the teams that were coming down. And one of the things that I would say every Sunday was, we're just being church. That's what this is about. If we had to boil it down to one thing, we're just being church. And here's what I mean by that. I think there are 5 things that make a church a church. Because of these 5 things, when we do them together as a community, that's the name that we put on ourselves as a community is church. And these are the 5 things: worship, prayer, fellowship, service, and witness. And I know there's tons of things that churches do, but I hope that all of the things that you're thinking about right now that churches do, I hope you can connect all of those things somehow or another to either worship, prayer, fellowship, service, or witness. What does that have to do with the next 6 days here? Well, I've worshiped at your church on a Sunday morning. I grew up at a traditional Methodist church in Eastern North Carolina. And our worship services and the worship services at your church that I've been a part of, they're not exactly like what you've been a part of this morning. And of course, this is a little out of the ordinary because we're outside. There's 8 different churches that are all here. So this is kind of a big deal. But even normal Sunday morning worship here, I mean, it pretty much looks and sounds like that. We're just in a room together. But I hope, and my expectation is that as different as this looked and sounded and might have even felt this morning, you recognize that it was worship, right? And I hope that even more than just recognizing it as worship, I hope that all of you felt invited and included and were able to participate in that worship. Even though you didn't maybe understand all the words that they were saying or exactly what they were doing, I hope that you felt at home here. All week long, we will be worshiping. We know that worship doesn't just happen in a specific spot according to a specific schedule that's printed in a bulletin, right? You may be washing dishes after a meal this week with someone who you've just met. That can be worshipful. You may be mixing concrete with people that you don't speak the same language as them, but that can be worshipful. You may be playing on the playground with some of the children that are in our daycare program. That can be worshipful. Anything that we do that is sort of an outward way of saying God is God and I am not can be an act of worship. So worship is going to happen all week long. We've got that covered. prayer, I mean, that was number 2. Number 1's worship, number 2 is prayer. Prayer for me sort of follows the same lines. The church where I grew up doesn't pray like that, with everybody praying out loud at the same time, praying different things. I call it the indistinguishable hum, because you can't really tell what anybody else is saying. You don't really need to, but it's just this collision of voices, and I think it's beautiful. But if you've never experienced prayer like that before, it can be a little uncomfortable. And it takes stepping out of your comfort zone to really be a part of it. I remember a Sunday morning when I was a teenager in my home church. We had a visitor one Sunday, and clearly she was a visitor because halfway through that traditional 11 o'clock service, at some point during the service, she had her hands raised. And it was scandalous that night at youth group, that crazy lady that had raised her hands during the 11 o'clock service. So this was not what I was used to, when I moved here. But one of the things that I hear most often from volunteers who come to be a part of this with us is how much they enjoy the way they feel the Spirit in the worship services here and the freedom that they feel during the worship services here. And let me stop right there and just say, I am not being critical of traditional worship. I love and miss traditional worship. I miss saying and hearing the Apostles' Creed and the Lord's Prayer and having liturgy. There are things about all of that I love and appreciate. There are also things about all of this that I really love and appreciate, and consider myself lucky that I get to bounce back and forth between both of those things. But one of the really important parts of what it is that we're doing here as a ministry is opening doors for you all to experience this, maybe in a different and unique way, and to learn from that. Now, the worst possible mistake you could make would be to have an amazing week with us here, and then go back and try and impose that on your church, right? Or for you all or for me to come here and try and impose liturgy and tradition and all of those things on the church here. Disaster. Those are square pegs and round holes. But that doesn't mean that there aren't things that each of us can learn by worshiping and praying together. We started taking mission teams from here to the United States after Hurricane Katrina hit. And almost every year, with a couple of exceptions, we've been able to take a team from here to the U.S. And we've done hurricane relief, and we've gone to Alabama and done tornado relief. We've done inner city work, all kinds of different things. And I love it how almost every single time after we've gone to the 11 o'clock traditional service at whatever church is hosting us that week, somebody from here will come up to me and say, "That was amazing. Everybody knew exactly what they were supposed to do and exactly where they were supposed to be, and they were so prepared, and they got everything into a 55-minute service." To me, that says we're good. If what they see here or what you see when you come here is new and exciting, and there are pieces of that you can take home with you and have them be a productive part of your prayer life and your worship life and your church life, that's fantastic. And if there are things that the people from here can learn when they go back with us to your churches, that they can also appreciate and grow from and be stretched from, then that's perfect. That's exactly what a relationship should look like. We should all be benefiting and learning things and be challenged equally from a healthy relationship. So we've got worship, we've got prayer, fellowship. I don't know if any of you have looked at the calendar on our website of teams that are coming down over the course of this year, but there's about 30 teams that are on the calendar. And they're all designated either as old friends or new friends. And the vast majority of them are old friends. And that's churches like yours, who, even though some of you have been here before, most of you haven't. You're still in the old friends category because you're friends. And there are churches who have been old friends on our calendar every year since we started in 2003. So for 20 years, with the exception of the 2 years that just happened that nobody could go anywhere, they have come here to be a part of this. And there are some individuals in those churches who haven't missed a trip. I know that the reason why they come back year after year after year is not because they love construction work that much. It's because of the relationships that they've built with the people here, with me and with my family, with the pastors that we work with the communities where we work. That's what brings people back year after year. Keep an eye on John, and it may have happened already last night when they delivered the coffee maker, but watch how big of a smile he gets on his face when Ugo and Fanny and Ugito and Yolanda show up. That smile has nothing to do with mixing concrete or plastering walls or anything like that. It's those friendships. So it made perfect sense last week when one of the guys who works for us, who was preparing to get married, asked if it would be possible we were going to have sort of an off day in the middle of the week. And he said, do you think anybody from the team might want to come? I've got to build a stage and we've got to hang lights. We need to plant some plants in this empty lot where we're going to have our wedding. And there was absolutely no hesitation when I mentioned that to John. Yes, we would love to do that. Why? Because he was that excited about building a stage? No. It's because it was an opportunity to go and spend time with a friend and be a part of this really special day that was getting ready to happen. It wasn't anything we had planned for this week. It's not the kind of thing that we usually talk to teams, when you're gonna, or that you usually hear about when you think about going on a mission trip to Central America, is we're gonna go plant flowers in an empty lot because somebody's gonna get married there. But it makes perfect sense in the context of the kinds of relationships that can grow out of these sorts of trips. So please spend as much or more time and energy while you all are here this week getting to know the people around you. We really, really, really want the relationships to happen first and everything else to be a fruit that grows out of those relationships. So that may mean for some of you struggling through a language barrier by gestures and sign language and drawing pictures in the dirt, whatever it takes. Take that time to try and get to know the people around you. We had a team here of last summer, and from my office, I could hear one of the young team members who I think had just finished maybe Spanish 1 in high school. And Henry, one of the guys who works for us at the Missions and Ministry Center, every day, all week long, they were sort of working in the same area, and I could hear the conversations that they were having. And it was so tempting for me to run downstairs and be like, Henry, he's just trying to figure out, how many children you have. But I didn't. And I let them struggle through it. And by the end of the week, when it was time to get on the bus and leave, Henry and that kid were weeping because of the connection that they had built with one another. That kid is not going to remember the work that we did that week, but he will never forget Henry. So we've got worship, we've got prayer, we've got fellowship, service. That's probably the most obvious of the 5. I assume you all signed up for this trip, or unless somebody forced you to come. But if you signed up voluntarily for this trip, it's because you wanted to go and to serve and to help and to contribute, right? And that's good. We want you to come with that kind of a heart. But there's something that concerns me about what happens on these trips and then after these trips. And how many of you have heard someone say something like, I went to Costa Rica, or I went to Uganda, or I went to Cambodia to give, and the people there just gave me so much more than I gave them. You ever heard that? That's sort of standard post-mission trip commentary. I've said it. What concerns me about that isn't the fact that people felt loved by the communities that they had gone to serve. What concerns me is how often when you hear somebody say that, they're saying it in a way that makes it sound like they're surprised by the fact that they were served in the place that they went. If any of you are surprised by the fact that you will be served by one another and by Costa Ricans this week, I blame John, because he didn't do a very good job of preparing you for this trip. You know, there's a story in the Bible of Jesus washing the feet of the disciples. And that's the worst job to have. Like in the first century, the staff of a home, the person whose job it was to wash the feet of the visitors that were coming, that's not the job you wanted. And that's the posture that Jesus assumes in front of the disciples, is washing their feet. And it's right that we think about that and think about the humility that it took from him to do that. But there's another side of that story that I think doesn't get the attention that it really deserves. And that is the disciples allowed for their feet to be washed. And they resisted a little bit at first, but ultimately they did it. And I can't imagine that their lives were ever the same after doing that. I hope that this week, at different moments, you will find yourselves like Jesus, serving the people around you, pouring into them. But I also expect that while you are here this week, you will humble yourselves just like the disciples did, and recognize that there are people around me who have things that I need in my life, and that you will allow them to offer those gifts to you. Any relationship where one party in the relationship is doing all the giving and the serving and the doing, and the other party is just sitting there receiving and receiving and receiving and receiving, is not a healthy relationship, and it's not going to last. There has to be balance, and there has to be reciprocity for this to work. So pour out all week long, but allow yourselves also to be poured into while you're here. So we have worship, we have prayer, we have fellowship, we have service, witness. How are you all going to have a witness in this community this week? Well, every time Daniel's white buses pull into one of these communities, they see it. No matter how much you all might like to blend in while you're here this week, none of you are going to blend in while you're here this week. They see you, but that's good. We want them to see you, because we've been here long enough now that when people see those white buses, they connect them to our ministry and to the witness that we have in this place. They also connect us to the local churches where we're working and the witness that they have in their communities. But that's what we want. We want them to draw a direct line between your being here and what that church means in that community. Because when they do that, you have reinforced our witness, you have reinforced their witness. And inevitably, when we come into a new community and start working and building relationships with them, the first few weeks, you'll see people sort of standing across the street behind a tree, kind of peeking out to see what is going on over there. Who are those people? But over the time that we're there, they're not going to have to ask that question anymore. Because as our relationship grows with the church in Santa Marta, with Pastor Luis, as we start having, some churches are going to come later in the year and do like vacation Bible school stuff with the children in that community. You, just by your presence here, have a witness in this community. So all 5 of the things that make a church, worship, prayer, fellowship, service, and witness. All 5 of those things are going to happen between now and Saturday when you leave. So I think it's not just fair to say we're just being church. I think it's really helpful and healthy to talk about it that way. And here's why. But hopefully you will have an opportunity to talk to the church about this. If you stand in the pulpit and say, oh my gosh, it took us so long to get there, and it was so foggy on that mountain road, and there were so many curves, and it took so long. The bugs were so big, the chicharras wouldn't let us sleep at night. It was so hot. Basically, what you may as well be saying is, I'm a martyr, and here's how great I am for having sacrificed so much to go on this mission trip. And that's problematic on a whole bunch of different levels. But mostly what worries me about that is I guarantee you there are people hearing you talk about it that way whose immediate response is going to be, oh, I could never do that. That's not something I could ever be a part of. So by talking about it this way, even the people who, I know there are members of your church that are never going to go on a mission trip. They're never going to come here. But at least they can be a part of the conversation because they can relate to those 5 things. So when someone says, how was that mission trip? What did you all do? And you say, oh, we were church. We worshiped together and it was beautiful. I didn't understand the words that they were saying, but I really felt at home there in spite of how different it was. And man, you should hear these people pray. It is powerful. I've never prayed like that before. And I built relationships with people that I know I'm going to be friends with now for the rest of my life. And we had an opportunity to serve in the community, and wow, did they serve us too. And it was reciprocal, and that felt so good. And we had a witness in the community. Even though we didn't speak the language, they knew why we were there. They knew why this ministry is there. They knew what the witness of the church is in that community, and we just got to be a part of that. We were just church. And then you can talk about construction work if you want to. But I would really appreciate it if you would talk about all the other stuff first. Because if you don't, the impression that you're going to give to them is the most important thing that I did on that mission trip was I built something. Oh, and there are also nice people around. That's backwards. Let's talk about church. What did it mean for us to be church together, and how in this particular case, the work that we're doing this week is a fruit of our being church together.